Hi, this is Stu Stover again. We're picking up some additional topics on the international side of macroeconomics. So what I wanted to do today is just give you a very brief overview of what we call the Asian miracle. And the Asian miracle, sometimes called the many dragons, there's half a dozen other names that describe this phenomena, was basically three countries: Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. Now originally there were four, and Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was a British colony, I don't know, whatever category they were in, they reverted back to China in 1999, so they kind of dropped out of this list of the Asian miracle countries. So why are they called Asian miracle countries? So Taiwan was absolutely devastated in World War II. And on top of that, you had the civil war between Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang lost. He retreated with his buddies to Taiwan, which didn't help their economic situation. They were in economic distress. Absolutely. They were poor, in poverty. Their prospects did not look good in Taiwan in the 1950s and even into the early 1960s. South Korea, of course, they had the Korean conflict. So you had the North Koreans that went almost down to the bottom of South Korea before we pushed them all the way back to the top of North Korea before the Chinese came in, and then, it was back and forth. So the country was absolutely devastated. It had been ruled by Japan since early 1900s, so there wasn't much economic development that was happening in South Korea. Bad governments, all sorts of things. And so Singapore similarly was a British colony, got their independence in 1959 or 60, whatever year. They were very poor. They were in essence a trade port. That was really their only claim to fame, but very, very inconsequential in terms of the economics of the world stage. So we call it the economic miracle because around 1960, all three economies took off. And so now we're looking at Singapore having a per capita income that's about 50% higher than the American per capita income. Taiwan, there's a reason that China wants to fold them into the system because they are so economically prosperous. South Korea, we look at the products that you and I buy, an awful lot of them are kind of coming out of South Korea these days. So we call this the economic miracle because it did it so very quickly. No one expected it to happen. None of our economic advisors thought it was going to happen, and yet they pulled it off. So what makes this story interesting? Well, let's start with the dragon. So we call these the mini dragons. So Japan was the dragon. So they were the first country to reestablish economic prosperity after the end of World War II. Now it took them until the 1960s before it really kicked in, but what they did is they focused on an export market. Well, they focused on an export market because the country is so poor, people don't have any money, and as a result, they want to build stuff that they would send to the rest of the world. In some terms, we would call this a modern version of mercantilism. So they were trying to get capital, in mercantile terms, gold, silver, whatever, but get that into the country, because what are they going to do with it? It wasn't used to enrich the handful of elites, but it was used to build the country, build more factories, expand their export opportunities, expand all sorts of things. And part of what matters to us today about all of this is that all of these countries, whether it's Japan or these three, if you're a poor country, how many American goods can you buy? And the answer is you can't. The only way you can buy American goods is to be a prosperous country. So what they were was a very protectionist country, very much so. But that all changed as we got into the 90s and early 2000s. So what changed was all of a sudden, once you start doing this economic strategy, part of what happens is wages go up. Individuals within those societies have more disposable income. And so you can very gradually start switching the economy from an export-driven economy to a consumption-based economy. That's not an easy transition. All of these countries were told to sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice for the good of the country, sacrifice. And they did. So these countries typically had, in those 60s and 70s, had a 33 to 50% savings rates. They didn't have money to speak of, and yet they were still saving. Well, what did that mean? Not only did you have this money coming from overseas, from the products that they're selling, but what they also had is that there was money in the bank that could be loaned to companies to expand and do other stuff. So you had the double whammy on the positive side. So are they bad countries because they did that strategy? And I would argue, of course not, because they are some of our best friends in the world right now, and including Japan in that mix. And so the Asian miracle is fascinating to look at. I can't give you the whole story because there's far more to it. And if any of you are interested, I can point you to some videos that give you some background on this stuff and look at some of the history on it. But if I were a poor country around the world, I would be looking at how these countries got in the game and became consequential as economic players on the world scene. And frankly, from our standpoint as Americans, we need them. Not only produce goods that we want, whether it's cars or refrigerators or, pick an issue. Actually, there's a ton of examples of things that they provide for us. But the reality is now they are good partners with us. So they're buying American goods. And so a lot of wins for basically everybody. So I think we're in good shape. You should be able to at least get some sense of how this has played out in the past and how we can understand this for the future. Thank you very much.